Well, good evening. We're very pleased to have you all with us this evening, and I see Pettit here as well. And this event this evening is jointly sponsored by the Space Institute and Pat and the Baker Institute as well. But we're very pleased tonight to have Don Pettit, a NASA astronaut, speaking with us. Don has flown over 161 days in space on Expedition 6 up to the International Space Station. And of that, on that 161 days, he had 13 hours of it in the spacesuit doing extravehicular activities. So he's had a good deal of experience in space, but he's also been a very good engineer and has been involved working at Los Alamos before he came to NASA. He's been with NASA for 11 years, and previous to that time he was with Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico for 12 years. And was involved in a lot of activities that involved space. And more recently, he was down in the Antarctic, getting involved in a program that is sponsored by the National Science Foundation, looking for meteorites in the Antarctic. So Don is going to speak to us about that experience, and I think he'll be glad to talk to you and answer questions about some of his other involvements and experience as well. So let me turn it over to Don Pettit.
Thanks, George. It's always a pleasure to come here, and usually I'm sitting in the audience. On occasion, I'm standing up here. It's more relaxing to sit in the audience, but I've had the good fortune to be able to have spent about 5.5 months on Space Station as a crew member and go to Antarctica as a member of a scientific expedition that is collecting meteorites. And this expedition is sponsored by the National Science Foundation, and it's jointly sponsored by NASA as well. We go to Antarctica for about a 2-month period. Perhaps 6 weeks of that is actually spent out on the ice looking for meteorites. And what I'm going to do is compare and contrast living and working in space with living and working in Antarctica. And it's going to be sort of the human side, comparing and contrast what it means to be a human being on these scientific frontiers, doing a scientific mission and collecting data, living and working in these areas. So just a little location map here. This is Antarctica. All the little green circles are where the ANSMET expedition, that's the Antarctic Search for Meteorites, that's where they have been. And they've been going every year to Antarctica since 1976. And they found over 18,000 meteorites. And Antarctica has this strange a propensity to preserve and concentrate meteorites. And just in our 6-week period, we found 850 meteorites. And where we were up in the Beardmore group. And the South Pole is just about where the sea is in the Wisconsin range. And we were about 200 miles from the South Pole, about 800 miles from McMurdo, which is the major U.S. base there. This is sort of a location map that shows where we were on Space Station. And the orbit goes around Earth sort of like a hula hoop circling a beach ball. And it's tipped at an angle to the equator of about 52 degrees. And this is a snapshot showing what it's like when you're at your southernmost point in your orbit. And the light blue circle is your horizon circle. And you can see that you can visually look a fair distance into the coastal region on Antarctica, just as you're going by. Now, to get to these places, these are frontiers. And one of the characteristics of a frontier is that you got to figure out how to get there. And this is how we got there to Antarctica. We were deployed in C-130s, pretty big airplane. We had 8,000 kilograms of gear with us. And they dumped us out about at 9,000 foot level, 200 miles from the South Pole. They didn't come back for 6 weeks. Well, here's how you get to Space Station. You get on this vehicle, and when those solid rocket boosters light, you really know you're going someplace. Well, here's a picture around camp. these are the tents that we use. They're Scott tents. They're patterned after what Robert Scott designed in 1911, which, incidentally, he froze to death in one of these. And so anyway, that's what our camp looked like. Here's a little snapshot taken around camp in Space Station. And this was taken when Ken Bowersox and I were going for a little jaunt outside. And we took a happy snap here. Now, I'm going to show a little video here. If we could have the lights down a bit for this. And I'll kind of narrate over the video. And this will give you a kind of a feeling for what it's like to collect the meteorites in Antarctica. Okay, perfect. So we were living and working on blue glacier ice. It was bare ice, predominantly bare ice, maybe a little bit of wind-blown snow on top of it. Fairly smooth ice like you see there. And that's where you find the meteorites. And there's our camp. And meteorites have this habit of falling on Earth isotropically, which is a fancy way of saying that every square mile of Earth has the same probability of having a meteorite land on it. But when meteorites land in Antarctica, they're preserved, and then the ice moves around and actually concentrates them. So the ANSMAT average since 1976 is 10 meteorites per square kilometer. And so the way you find 850 meteorites is to search a lot of square kilometers, and the way you do that is with snowmobiles. So these are the Meccano equivalent of dog sleds. So I like to call them our Meccano dog sleds. And so we use these snowmobiles and systematically search these areas of blue ice. And the more ice you search, the more meteorites you find. Sometimes you get areas where you have to walk around a little bit and look at the terrestrial wind-blown rocks that are out there. Now that's a meteorite. And that's exactly how we find them. It's sort of like a cosmic Easter egg just sitting on top of the ice. It's pretty exciting. Now this one, look at this one. This is a lunar meteorite, a chunk of the moon the size of your fist that we found. We were pretty excited when we found that. And we have a well-defined method for bagging them up and documenting what we're doing here. The wind typically blows about 40 kilometers.
Interesting one yesterday.
Oh, here we go. Here's the audio.
Well, it's clearly different from ordinary chondrites in terms of its texture. We don't know exactly what it is. We won't know until we get it back.
It's unbelievable. It's been a windy, cold day. We haven't been finding very many. So when we find something like this, it's like Christmas, and New Year's, and Easter all in one.
The same laboratory that handles the lunar samples handles the meteorites here at Johnson Space Center.
Hi, Mom. How you doing?
Okay.
This is my roommate, Doc.
That's me. Neither one of us have had a bath in about a week and a half now. We'll be looking really good after 6 weeks.
Okay, stop, Doc. Stop.
There's our stuff. It came out the back of the C-130, sort of like a dog having a litter of puppies.
It's actually getting warmer. I don't know if you can see that, but it's up to about 10 now.
Minus 10?
Beef. It's what's for dinner.
Too bad they were frozen in a lot to feed 18 people.
Yeah.
Well, I got Cliff's secret special curry sauce there that we're going to put on these prawns right here.
Oh, prawns. Oh, wow.
And we're making some minute rice. So we can put the curry on top of minute rice, and we have a seafood Thai soup there.
Seafood Thai soup.
With halibut, salmon,
Oh, cool.
and shiitake mushrooms. So we're kind of...
Wow.
And we may put these scallops in too.
Oh, scallops?
I just try and tip some ice so he can make some water and have a drink of tea and then have a bath inside the tent.
Okay, excellent.
He's so nice.
Meteorites turn out, because they're some of the oldest rocks in our solar system, turn out to be the ultimate source, if you will, of answers to questions like where did the solar system as a whole come from? Where did the Earth come from? So these are pretty big questions, and meteorites are basically unaltered from those earliest days of the solar system's formation.
Right above them, right there. Isn't that awesome? That's great. Don't you hate those home movies?
Okay. Frontiers are where people like to go. And Antarctica is a frontier. Space is a frontier. And these are places that are characterized by your intuition doesn't apply when you go to these frontiers. The intuition you have honed from living here in Houston and other places, it no longer applies. And when you go to an environment like that, it makes an environment that's rich for potential discovery. And I think that's one reason why human beings like to go to these places, because you can see things that you've never seen before, and in the process of doing that, you can make new observations, you can make new discoveries. And if we could turn the lights down just a little bit here. Here's an example of one of these. We had our main mission, which was gathering meteorites. But because you're in this unique place, you could see fades like what you see here. And see that cliff that's across the sea ice? That's a mirage. And I remember reading about this when I was in high school. It's a special mirage. It's the Fata Morgana. And there's only a few special places where you can see this, typically in polar regions. And we were walking on the sea ice, and I looked, and it's like, wow, there it is. I've been reading about it for years, never seen it with my eyes. Amazing. Well, here's an example. And again, can we turn the lights down just a little bit? Here's an example of when you are on an orbital platform like space station. It allows you to see things on a length scale of the order of half a continent. And this is just an example over the tip of South America. You can see Tierra del Fuego there on the left, going up to the Straits of Magellan, and then going all the way up to Argentina, and then there's the Patagonia range. So this is what you can see from an orbital platform, and you can see phenomenon on a length scale that you can't see if your feet are on the ground, or you can't see from an airplane. You stand back far enough, and new patterns and things start to emerge. And so this represents an environment where you can make observations that are hard to see elsewhere. Now this is going to be a movie, and again, we need the lights down low for this movie, if that's possible. And this is a movie taken out a window on space station showing the motion of orbital motion and aurora. And you can see there's the belt in Orion there. And that thing that looks like a slice of key lime pie, the transparent thing, that's the thickness of our atmosphere, and that's about 100 kilometers. And then you can see a solar panel from space station. And this is framed at about orbital rate, near orbital rate. So this is how you see this when you look out a window on space station. And again, you can see this structure on a length scale of half a continent, and you can see things that you can't see from the ground or from airplanes. Observing aurora is just amazing from orbit. And it in itself could be the root of a scientific program if you so desired. We have other main programmatic missions for space station right now, but as long as you are there, you can go ahead and make some of these observations. Now, here's another little demonstration of the uniqueness of what you'll find in Antarctica. Okay, James, kick the ball. We were at 9,000 feet here. And look at that soccer ball.
Amazing. How long do you think that's going, James?
Oh, at least half a minute.
Let's do it again.
I mean, when you go to a frontier like this and you're someplace where your intuition doesn't apply, you can once again see the world through the eyes of a child. And someone pointed out to me that perhaps a scientist is being a professional child. I don't know. Now here's an example of one of the work areas in Antarctica. This is a moraine, which is a fancy name for saying a whole bunch of rocks that glaciers have scattered around. At every place you see a flag is where we found a meteorite. So that's about a 50 meter by 50 meter section. And there's 6 meteorites we found there. And see that big rock in those wind-blown pockets around the rock? In one of those we found 6 or 7 meteorites. They bounce around from the wind because it's blowing 40 kilometers per hour. And then they fall in one of those pockets and then they sit there. So again, this is just an amazing environment. It transcends your normal experience. And again, it's one of the reasons we go to these places. Now we're going back to the space station now. And here's just, again, a neat little observation of being in this orbital environment and what you can make of it. This is one of our compact disc players. Just the spinning music disc gives it a certain amount of gyroscopic stability. And you realize there's 3 of us on board space station, so we have 3 of these things. And there's one turned off, and it freely tumbles about its center of mass. And then there's one turned on, so you get that stability. Now, being kind of engineer types, what are you going to do? So we take 2 of these together at right angles, so now we have a 2-axis gyroscopically stabilized platform. And you saw it was turned off, and now it's turned on. Look at that. It has more stability than just one by itself. So, realize that we have 3 of those on there. It'd be a kind of engineering geeky types. What are we going to do? So there we have a 3-axis platform. It's turned off. It freely tumbles about its center of mass. And here it is. It's turned on. So now we have a 3-axis stabilized platform, complements of a music disc. And I had one student ask me if playing heavy metal would have given you more stability. And I don't think so. But now, what can you use it for? So what we do is we tape our flashlight to it. And then when you work in a dark corner of a space station with your drill driver there, you use the platform now as a third hand to orient your light. You can work in the platform, you can work in station, and you can listen to music at the same time. So again, that's illustrating what you can do in this environment. It's not part of your main mission, but because you have human beings there that can think freely, you can explore and investigate other aspects of being in these truly unique places. Now, when human beings do go to these places, there are certain traits that human beings do just because you're human beings and you want to do them. And one is taking pictures. But then when you're on station, you also want to take pictures. So that's a normal thing for human beings to want to do, and oftentimes photographs and memories are all you have after you've come back. You've got reams of data with numbers on pieces of paper. Nobody likes to look at that. And so the pictures are what you have, and that's what illustrates what you did. Human beings like group shots. And this was after we found that lunar meteorite, and there it is wrapped up in a Teflon bag. And we were so thrilled and excited that we decided group shot. Well, here we are on space station doing the same thing. This was after docking. I think this was shortly after SOX took command of space station. Now, when you look like that, you can't help but want to take a self-portrait. But then, when you look like that, you can't help but want to take a self-portrait. Now, if you go to Antarctica, you're going to be spending, more than likely, Christmas away from home. Because the prime time to be in Antarctica is during the northern hemisphere winter, which is the southern hemisphere summer. And trust me, you don't want to be in Antarctica during the winter time. So, you're going to be spending Christmas and New Year's away from your family, possibly Thanksgiving as well. The same kind of thing happens when you go to space station. You can spend Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, Halloween, birthdays, anniversaries, and you miss out on all of those. And your family, in this respect, participates in your exploration vicariously, not through you, because you're always gone. And they have to just make do when you're gone. And you'll even miss tax day when you're on the space station. But trust me, Uncle Sam won't let you really miss it. So there we are in Antarctica, celebrating Christmas. Well, here we are on space station, Ken Bowersox and I celebrating Christmas. And we're the kind of the focal point because we're on space station and everybody knows it. And so they take really good care of us, and people come by and take care of our families. But the people who sort of get overlooked are the flight controllers, because they have to work on Christmas too. And nobody even thinks about telling them Happy Christmas. So Sox and I decided to do a Christmas song for the flight controllers. And the instruments we had were a didgeridoo and a harmonica. So I'll give you a little bit of jingle bells here on a didgeridoo. And remember, a didgeridoo can make one note. I mean, if you were sleeping on the console at Mission Control, that would certainly wake you up. Okay, now spare time. What do you do with your spare time when you go off on these missions? You can't work 24 hours a day. Even in Antarctica, you have 24 hours of sunlight, and you try to work 24 hours a day, but you can't. And you'll find you'll be working 12, 14, 16 hours a day, and eventually you just collapse and you got to sleep. And you get into a routine that protects yourself so that you can get all the sleep you need. You have to take care of items like cooking dinner and maintenance around the camp and things like that. You will have some time, some spare time. So what do? If you can take advantage of this unique environment, you might be able to develop something that's equivalent to scrimshaw. In this case, it would be scrimshaw on ice. If you're on space station, it would be orbital scrimshaw. And so here's an example of my scrimshaw on ice. I figured out how to make tubes out of ice from the glaciers. And where we were camped, the glacier ice was 40,000 years old. So we could make these ice tubes out of 40,000-year-old glacier ice. And they were actually an ice-ice composite. Not unlike the carbon-carbon composite we use on the space shuttle for the leading edge. This is an ice-ice composite. You wouldn't want to use that on the leading edge of the shuttle, but it has extraordinary strength because you have an ice crystal matrix that you've infiltrated with liquid water and then let it freeze again. And it makes this really tough composite. And down below you can see little lengths of it. They're about 1.5 feet long. We found that we could dip the ends of these shades in water and then stick them together just like you're gluing PVC pipe together. And so what it really allowed you to do is make a didgeridoo out of ice. I mean, that's just what you need when you're in the middle of Antarctica, is a didgeridoo made out of ice. You could see it there, the right-hand picture. And you are going to get subjected to what this thing sounded like. And it's actually kind of neat to have this didgeridoo made out of ice, 40,000-year-old ice, and you could jam with the katabatic wind. It was kind of neat. You could also voice through it and do all kinds of neat things. Okay, so that's scrimshaw on ice, taking advantage of the environment that you happen to be in. And all of this is part of investigating, observing the environment, because in these kinds of investigations lie the seeds for future discoveries. And you can't do these kinds of investigations at the expense of your main mission. But as long as you're there, you got a little bit of spare time, you take advantage of what the environment has to offer. And here's an example of a little discovery we made on space station. And this is the galley in the Russian service module. And this is where we take our meals. And there in the center of the table is a bag of tea. And it's not a tea bag, but it's a bag of tea with a tea bag in the bag of tea. and you inject hot water in this thing, and you brew up a bag of tea. And then we have a straw that we could suck the tea out, which you could see I'm doing right there. And you kind of feel like you're some kind of an insect sucking the juices out of another insect. It's kind of gauche. And so we wanted to see if we could figure out a more elegant way of eating or drinking your tea. So here's what we came up with. We found that you could eat your tea with chopsticks. So look at this. There's a straw going to the tea bag there on the left, and there's a blob of tea going out. And you could just snag that blob of tea with your chopsticks, and then you can eat it. And I challenge anybody to try to do that down here. It just doesn't work right. And so there you are. Look at that. There's surface tension makes a nice spherical blob of tea. You could grab it. You could snag it with your chopsticks. Surface tension is your friend in a weightless environment. Oh, and look at the profile on the can of honey. That's Meod for Russian. Notice it's a hemispherical profile. Liquids are flat profile here at gravity, but you take gravity away, you get hemispherical profiles. So there we are eating this tea. You can spill a few drops. And again, this is an elegant way of doing it. Now, here's a can of Meod, the Russian honey, and the Russian food doesn't have any Velcro on it. So how do you hold it to the table? Well, we use this surface chemistry trick, and this may be one of the more important uses of surface chemistry that I studied in college. You put a blob of water on the bottom of your can, and then voila, you just stick it to the table. So surface tension can be your friend. So again, these are little things that you develop in these unique frontier environments simply because you are there and you can. And these things, to first order, are sort of parlor tricks, educational things to show students. But you never know when there can be seeds in these kinds of observations for making some more worthwhile discovery. Now, stuff. When you go to a frontier, you're usually living in a place where human beings can't innately be. And you have to bring stuff with you to allow you to live there. So here's an example of our tent. You have all this stuff in there. And when you're putting on all your parkas and all these multiple layers of stuff to go outside, you almost feel like you're in one of those great white spacesuits in the airlock on space station. You have that much stuff that you have to deal with. And then you can lose stuff. You're always looking for things. So this is my tent mate's corner of the tent. And he lost his toothbrush. And he did not bring a backup toothbrush. And of course, being from NASA, I brought a backup toothbrush, right? Because you don't want to go for 6 weeks without brushing your teeth. And eventually, he found his toothbrush. About 3 or 4 days later, he found his toothbrush. It was frozen to the bottom of his spare pair of boots. And it was just in the corner of the tent. And so when you have all this stuff, managing this stuff and dealing with it becomes a significant part of your activity. And here's an example on space station. This is John Phillips' Expedition 11 in the airlock. And again, stuff. You need this in order to survive in space. And you'll need the bag filled with spare parts. You need the bag with your spacesuit. You need the bag that has all the tools you need to fix the things that goes with the bag of spare parts. But when you're not using these things, they have to be stowed someplace. And you're literally swimming in all this stuff. And this is a characteristic, I think, of when you go to a frontier. You got to bring stuff, and you got to figure out how to deal with it. And it's no different whether you're in Antarctica or on space station. Now, malfunctions. This is one of our mechano dogs for our dog sleds, and our whole life geared around our snowmobiles. Because we moved our camp 4 times over a course of about 120 kilometers in 4 separate hops. Because we'd, like gold panners, we'd play out the meteorites in one area, and then we'd move 30, 40 kilometers away and set up camp again for a week and a half or 2 weeks, and then we'd move. And you have 8,000 kilograms of gear, and you have all these Nansen sledges and things like that. And you can't live without your mechano dog sled. You can't do your job without your mechano dog sled. And this one caught on fire. it had electrical fire. One of the fellows was driving it, and a big puff of smoke came out, and it just quit. Fortunately, it didn't catch on fire, and actually burned, but all electrical wiring on the motor burned up. And we towed it back to camp, and we're scratching our heads, and we figured out that we could rewire the motor using the wiring harness for the backup beeper. So it was kind of like a surgeon that takes veins out of your leg and then transplants them in your heart, right? So we took the wires from the backup beeper, rewired them on the engine, and we're able to get it started where you just pull the rope. The electric start didn't work, and the headlight didn't work, and the handlebar heaters didn't work. But we could run the engine and we could get our job done. And when we called back to McMurdo Ops, we were quite proud that we were able to get our snowmobile fixed. And they were actually happy that we got it fixed. But then they found out that that the backup beeper wasn't working. And they were a little concerned that the backup beeper wasn't working. And I use this as an example that when you're working in a frontier and you have a mission control someplace else, you can get a little bit disconnected because you're living and working in one environment and they're living and working in another environment, and you can have some little issues crop up like this. And of course, we would never have anything like that happen between a crew on orbit and the mission control on the ground. And what it means is both sides have to be willing to work with the other side in order to get the mission done. You have to sometimes bite your lip and go with the flow just because you want to get the mission done, and both sides are highly motivated to do that. Well, here's an example on space station. The treadmill broke. This is in the Russian segment. And stuff on space station is always breaking. And NASA gets grief for that. But most of this stuff is one-of-a-kind special equipment designed specifically for operating in a weightless environment. It's serial number 001. And it's designed the best we know how, but human beings being what they are, it's bound to break. And so the fact that we're always working on it, that's not a surprise. And what we learn by always working on it and making this stuff is in part why we are there in space in the first place. We need to learn how to live and work in space. We need to be able to make a toilet that doesn't break. We need to have an oxygen generating system that keeps working. We need to have a treadmill that doesn't break all the time. And we're in the process of learning that. Sleeping. There we are, snug as a bug in a sleeping bag in Antarctica. The floor of our tent stayed at minus 10 degrees centigrade. We had some foam pads that we kept on top of that, so we weren't actually laying on ice. But it was the floor level of the tent was pretty cold. Here we are on space station. That's Nikolai Budarin, a Russian cosmonaut on our mission, and he's in his little sleep station there. Frozen clothes. You come in, you've been working outside 6 to 8 hours. You actually can develop a fair amount of sweat inside. So you take your warm, sweaty clothes off and put them in the corner of the tent, and what do? They freeze. Again, sort of an unusual observation, particularly for folks that live here in Houston. Well, here's something on space station. Now, we had a visit by the Invisible Man. And these clothes aren't frozen. But this is an observation you can make because you're in a weightless environment. It turns out the intrinsic stiffness of cloth is weak compared to gravitational force driven by the mass of the cloth. So you put a shirt on the dresser and it just flattens out. But you take that same shirt in a weightless environment and kind of shake it out a little bit, it puffs up. And it almost looks like somebody's wearing it. And that's because the stiffness in the fabric is stiff enough to hold it out in some kind of a shape in a weightless environment, but in gravity it just flattens out. So again, one of these interesting observations that you can make there, but you can't make down here. Oh, this is my tent mate. He broke a tooth off. About 6 weeks in, we still had another month, he broke a tooth off. And I looked at it, and it looked like a cross-section of a tooth that you see when you're in first grade where, there's the enamel and then there's the dentine and there's the pulp. And I was poking on a little bit with the screwdriver point of my Leatherman, and every time I'd do that, he'd jump a little bit and squeak. And we needed to do something about this, and I was the only one that had any kind of dental training, and that's compliments of NASA from Fly to Space Station. And we had a pretty decent medical kit that the Medical Ops Center at McMurdo had outfit us with, and there was a emergency filling replacement tooth repair kit in there. So I fixed his tooth using that kit. But we didn't have a lot of tools, and so I actually used the Leatherman to fix his tooth and spackle the stuff around on it with. And again, this is an example. When you are in a frontier, you use whatever tool you can use to get the job done. And in this case, it happened to be the Leatherman. Another thing, notice the rubber glove on my hand, and it's all fractured. We had one pair of rubber gloves, and they were on the floor of the tent, and they were minus 10, maybe even a little colder. So I put them on, and they just split because they were cold. You know, I had no idea that was going to happen. It was our only pair of gloves, so you just make do with what you have because that's all you have. If I would have been thinking, I would have taken those rubber gloves and stuck them in my armpit and warmed them up a bit, and then I could have put them on before I worked in his mouth. Now, fortunately on station, we didn't have any medical emergencies, but medical experiments are one of the class of experimental investigations that are going on space station. And so here's an example. Nikolai Budarin is a guinea pig, an electromechanical bio guinea pig in the Russian segment, going through some tests that are being inflicted on him by the Russian doctor team on the ground. And this is just if you go to space station, you're gonna be a guinea pig, and that's just a part of it. Visiting vehicles. Here's our camp, and see that little spot up in the air? That's a de Havilland Twin Otter, flown by a bunch of folks from Canada. They go down. They fly all winter in northern Canada, and then when it's summertime in Canada, they go down to Antarctica and fly all Antarctic summer. They fly Antarctic summer there. Actually, they fly Antarctic summer, which is winter in Canada. Anyway, so the de Havilland Twin Otter came for a resupply about 3 weeks in. And it's a big deal when you're living out like that and you get a resupply with a plane coming in. Well, on space station, we had the same thing. About 3 months in, we get a Progress vehicle coming up. And again, the impact that has on the crew when you get a resupply is immense. Now, here's that Twin Otter in our camp. And we got some more drums of fuel and some more propane. And there's a snowmobile. And we're going to show how these Canadians get a snowmobile into an airplane in the field. And what they do, the pilot starts the snowmobile up. And look at this. He just drives it up that plank. It's about 1.5 feet wide. It's just wide enough to roll a barrel down. And he'll drive the snowmobile right into the airplane. So again, when you're in a frontier, sometimes you do things that you just do things in a way that you can get done where you are, and that probably isn't an ISO 9000 approved way of getting a snowmobile on an airplane, but that's just what you have to do. Now, this is actually a Soyuz coming into station, but when Progress comes, it has a big impact on the crew. When you open the hatch, there's all kinds of goodies in there, food, spare parts, things like that, but they always throw a few sacks of whatever fresh fruit they happen to have in Kazakhstan at the time. And for us, it was oranges and lemons. And so you open up the hatch and you get this smell of oranges coming in. And here's what you do. You've been living in this engine room environment for so long, and you just really want to smell the orange. So first you eat the orange, and then you stick it on your nose, not so you look like Bozo the Clown, but so you can fill your nostrils full of the orange smell. Now, here's one of the Scott tents, and that flag is a NASA flag of exploration. It's the official flag for the Exploration Office. It's been around longer than the Exploration Office has actually officially been around, because there were a few years where they had to go underground in order to continue to do their work. But now that we're going back to the moon and going to Mars, this flag surfaced again, and it's kind of like a flat Stanley. It's been all around the world. When NASA people go to various places, I took it up to space station with me. So it's been to space station, it's been to the Great Wall of China, it's been up to Devon Island, and so I was asked to take it to Antarctica. And it's kind of an empty symbol. It's a symbol that you hold it up and you take a picture and then you fold it up and you put it away. So from a utility point of view, it's not really participating in the mission. However, we needed a signal flag. And I thought, oh, this is a perfect use. We'll actually put this symbol of NASA exploration to work. And so we tied it to that bamboo pole and put it in this tent. And it served a very important purpose in our expedition. And here's what it served. This tent was the poo tent. And when somebody was in there, you had to put this flag up so you knew that somebody was in there, because you wouldn't want to be sitting in there at minus 20 and be surprised, right? So we put this flag to work, and it actually provided a very important service to our whole camp. It kept the harmony going in our camp. It really did. Now, another aspect of exploration is the people it takes to get it done. And for a space mission, us lucky folks who get to climb on a rocket are just literally the tip of the iceberg. And when you're scientists out on the glaciers, you're literally the tip of the iceberg again. You have hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are working other places, less glorious jobs that allow you to be where you are and do your science. And there's a picture of the front room flight control team for a shuttle flight. And then there's a picture of the winter over crew for the folks at McMurdo that keep the base operational. And human beings, it occurred to me that to get rockets into space, we stage. To get human beings in these frontiers, we need to stage again, but you're staging with human flesh. So you'll have 100 people working back here, and then 10 people working someplace more advanced to get 2 or 3 people actually out working in the environment. So we're staging just like we do with rockets, but we're staging with people. And we are very privileged to be able to be at the very edge of the frontier here and be supported by all of these folks. It's a real honor to be able to do that, and it's something that you can't forget about. With that, this is sort of my summary slide. This is taken from a Pat Rawlings painting. He's a space artist. And if you get the SIAC calendar this year, I think the November calendar is this painting. So if you have that, you can turn ahead 1 month, or actually you only need to wait a couple of days, and you'll see this. This is an Antarctic explorer, and you can see there's Mount Erebus in the background. It's an active volcano there. There's a Scott tent. There's the Antarctic explorer. He's got his glacier glasses on, but he's got reflections of someplace else. And this conveys a lot of neat concepts. One is using Antarctica as an analog for spaceflight. Because you can't run a marathon, you can't train for a marathon by running marathons. You have to do something short of a marathon to train. And spaceflight is like that. You don't train for spaceflight by doing spaceflights. You have to train doing something short. And Antarctica is certainly an interesting place for when we go on expeditions further and further away from Earth, places like the moon, places like Mars. Doing training in Antarctica might certainly be a possibility. Another aspect that I like on this painting is that we're actively working on the technology to go back to the moon and to be able to go elsewhere. And hopefully, sometime in the future, we'll be able to not just have a painting of this, but we'll be able to replace it with actual photographs. And the third aspect that I'd like to leave you with is just the concept of a frontier, where you go to these places, your normal intuition doesn't apply. and it makes a place that's rich in potential discovery. And I think it has special appeal to human beings because we're curious creatures, and we go to these places, and sometimes for not well-defined reasons, but we go to them anyway. And a lot of social good over time has come from doing such exploration. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was excellent. We appreciate that talk. Would you be willing to take some questions?
Sure. Any questions? Yes.
You know, I was in a polar environment for a long time, and one of the big problems we had was static electricity. And did y'all have a lot of problems where, like, when you touch something, you'd have a spark? And then when you came back from space, how long did it, I got two little things. How long did it take you to even walk? And then two, how long did it take you when you got back, not to act funny, you know, when you got back from Antarctica?
Okay, well, some folks might say that I'm still acting funny. I'm not haven't quite a return to normal. In Antarctica, you do have static electricity because you have a lot of fabrics that I'm going to turn that off. Right. You have a lot of fabrics that can generate static electricity, and it's a very low humidity environment which tends to foster that. So you have little lightning bolts going off, and that's just a fact of life. If we had dogs, real dogs, instead of mechano dogs, you could always do the little trick where you go up to a sleeping dog and touch his nose, and you know you could do that once. But we didn't do that. And then when we came back from space station, it takes a while, a couple of days, and you're back to a semi-normal state in terms of just getting around. When you first come back, you're pretty gimpy. You're kind of wobbly. It takes a day or two to get, at least for me, to get my shore legs back. Any other questions? Yes.
I noticed the Scott tents are very pointed. Most tents that are sold these days are more rounded. What's the logic of the pointed versus rounded in the wind?
That's a good question. I'll talk a little bit about the Scott tents because there's some beauty in there that Scott designed in 1911 that I think isn't quite apparent to a casual glance. The base is 8 foot by 8 foot square, and the tent's 9 feet tall. And one of the things you could do is you could stand up in the middle, and that allows you to put on all this gear. Because if you try to put on all this stuff while you're sitting down, if you're in a tent that's only this high, it's really tough to put on all this stuff. Another thing that the tallness does, you have a little stove going in there. The chimney can actually be quite warm. The floor of the tent, and I instrumented our tent, the floor was -10 centigrade. If you had the stove going, right about chest level was 0 centigrade. But up in the chimney was +15 to +20. And so that's about what the temperature is outside now. And so that's where you hang all your wet, damp stuff to dry out. If you have a low-ceiling tent, you can't hang your stuff up, and you don't have the warm air rising to allow you to dry it out. Another thing about the Scott tents is they got 2 walls. At first, I thought, oh, that's to help provide insulation, and it doesn't do that. What it is, when you're in a tent, you're making all kinds of water vapor, and it freezes on the fabric, and then the wind blows, and you create this little snowstorm inside the tent where you're always getting little ice crystals dripping on you. And Scott saw that on his first expedition to Antarctica, and so he made this double-wall tent where the inner wall is kind of porous, and the vapor goes through the inner wall, freezes on the outer wall, and then when the tent flexes, the snow ends up in between the 2 walls. And so it doesn't constantly rain snow on you. So the double wall is not an insulating thing. It's to keep the snow off you. And when we have these tents set up for 2 weeks, there would be, you could see the snow line start to build up in the base of the tent. It work its way up as you'd get all this snow condensing in there. Yes?
Did you see any evidence of global warming?
Evidence of global warming. It was pretty cold there. And no, like in Greenland, it's obvious, I think, if you fly over with airplanes, that you could see the caps are melting. In Antarctica, where we were, it was good, healthy glaciers that were nice and cold. So we didn't have any direct indication of global warming where we were. Yes?
What kind of variety were there in the meteorites, and could you tell how long ago they were deposited?
Yes, that's a good question. A little bit more about the meteorites. Meteorites, I like to describe their construction debris left over from when our solar system was built. And so scientists that study these things, they're like cosmic dumpster diving, right? Because they're going into all this construction debris, and they're trying to figure out, what was our solar system like at the time it was condensing from whatever cosmic cloud that you imagine it was condensing from. And so the meteorites themselves are old. They're 4 or 5 billion years old. However, their Earth age, the ones we were finding, the average Earth age was about 40,000 years. So you're picking up meteorites that have been time integrated for about 40,000 years on this ice. But each one was billions of years old. And they ranged in size from something about like this to something about like that. And there's a whole bunch of there's a whole zoo of meteorites. And I'm not a meteorite expert. I learned a whole lot while I was there. But I'd hazard to guess on how many different kinds there are. If you pick up a meteorite and you call it a chondrite, chances are you'll be right. That's one of the things that I learned.
How many did you find?
Our mission, we found 850 meteorites.
They varied in size.
They varied in size, and the smaller the meteorite, the more of them you find. And so we found a couple of really big ones, a whole bunch of ones like that, and then hundreds of ones that were thumb size, and a whole bunch of ones that were little tiny ones like that. And the little tiny ones are actually more valuable than the big ones, because if you look at the composition of meteorites, there's a whole range of compositions, and there's some very rare composition meteorites that are rare in terms of what's left over in our solar system. And if you want to try to find that in a big meteorite, you might only get 4 or 5 big meteorites like that a year, but you can literally get hundreds of little tiny meteorites. So if you're looking for an unusual composition, you have a greater chance of finding it in a small meteorite simply because you have a greater sample in which to look at. And indeed, some of the smaller meteorites from our group turned out to show some of the more exotic compositions.
They're from the moon and Mars.
Yeah, and we didn't. In our group, I was told from the folks at Johnson Space Center that there might be 3 lunar meteorites and 1 Martian meteorite in this 850 group that we brought back. Yes?
2 questions for you. The first one is, I know you said you just drive around and you look for these rocks in a kilometer area and stuff, but how do you find something that's this big? I mean, are you just using your eyes to notice a difference in quality? And my second question is, when you go on these missions to Antarctica or to the space station and everything, what are the stress and health indicators that they tell y'all to look out for when people are in those types of environments, and how to deal with it when you're faced with that?
Both of them are good questions. Let me deal with the human question first. When you're in Antarctica, bare skin can basically freeze in just a few minutes, and everybody's looking out for everybody else. And so you might have a balaclava on, it might shift a little bit, and you get a little bare skin under your eye, and if you don't, and what it'll do, it'll start to sting. And then after a few minutes, and maybe you shuffle things around, and then it goes away. Well, the sting could go away because you fixed the problem and the skin's warming up, or the sting could go away because you didn't fix the problem and your skin has continued to cool down and now it's numb. And that's the first onset stages of getting frostbite. And you can't see that. And so you're always looking out for your buddy. And if you see white spots, and these layers turn white, if you see a white spot starting on somebody's face, you need to holler at them. Or if you're busy working on the snowmobile because it caught on fire and your fingers are starting to get numb, somebody will say, hey, you got to take a break, put your gloves on. So we're always looking out after each other, and we go through a fair amount of training in McMurdo, about 8 days worth of training before we go out in the field, where we look at crevasse rescue and other operations on the ice. And then we had 2 mountaineers with us, and I call them babysitters for scientists, because you have people that are very skilled and experienced in Antarctica, and you take all these scientists that have never been there before, and they're busy looking at the rocks, and they're looking at the cornice up above to see whether it's going to fall on you. So we had these mountaineers whose basic job was to make sure that none of us scientists got killed. And so you have this whole network of human beings helping each other. And the same thing for spaceflight. We've got so many doctors on the ground, and they're really helpful folks. And they not only look out after your family, but they look out after you. And again, you're part of this big team where everybody's working. And if you don't know a lot about the medical practices, well, you can get any information you need by just hollering at the ground, and they're more than happy to help. In terms of the meteorites, say again the meteorite question.
Well, you're just saying the variance in sizes and stuff, and you described how you just drive around and try to find them. How are you finding them if they're so small that they could look like any other little speck of rock shooting up out of the glacier?
That's a good question. When you're out in these glaciers, oftentimes the nearest mountain might be 10 kilometers away. And so you're out in this glacier, it's actively moving, it's moving maybe 10 meters a year. And if you find a rock, chances are it's a meteorite. There's no way to really get terrestrial rocks out in the middle of these glaciers. So it's amazing. You could be driving along your snowmobile, and it shakes quite a bit because you're going over this washboard ice, and you'll see maybe a kilometer away, you'll see a black speck in the ice. You drive up to it, and it's a meteorite. So if you find a rock in the ice, chances are it's a meteorite. So even somebody like me that's not a meteorite expert can find meteorites under those conditions. And it's amazing how well your eyes can pick out contrast, because these meteorites are black or dark green. And you're in this brilliant sunlit environment. And you can have a little meteorite that big sitting in ice 50 meters away, and you can see it. And you just drive up to it, you look, oh, another meteorite. And you pick it up with tongs and put it in a Teflon bag. So where it gets more complicated is when you're next to one of these mountaintops sticking out of the ice. And then you have all this terrestrial talus and moraine debris there. Literally thousands of little rocks and then a few meteorites mixed in with it. And we'll typically get off the snowmobiles and just make a search line and march down. And the meteorites look different than just standard rocks. They look like they look like a charcoal briquette from your barbecue. And that's quite a different look than a rock that's just been fractured and weathered from some talus slump.
Did y'all find any ticolites?
Oh, ticolites? No. Ticolites are Earth rock. When you have a big asteroid or a big meteorite impact on Earth that blows up a bunch of rock, and it melts, the impact actually melts a bunch of the country rock, the surrounding Earth. And those little blobs get thrown up kind of like lava bombs from a volcano, and then they solidify. So you get these things that look like obsidian, but they look like a big teardrop. And it's not meteorite material, it's Earth material. And you can find those. You can buy them on eBay. They're fairly inexpensive. You can get them for a couple bucks a piece. No, we did not find any of those in Antarctica. Yes?
I think in somehow this is a stress-related question. Like the fact that you're in constant orbit around the Earth, you'll be going through a lot of cycles of sunrise and sunset. Now you're in Antarctica where you have constant sunlight.
Yes.
So it's completely different. So how do you cope up with that?
It's different, but it's similar in that you tend to work yourself to death in these places. When you're in 24 hours of sunlight, and there's always work to do around camp. I mean, snowmobiles are in, they rattle. There's always bolts coming loose. The carriage wheels need to be tightened up almost every day. Lots of maintenance that need to be done. And you can work 24 hours a day. There's always something to do. But you can't. You physiologically can't. So you have to force yourself into some kind of a routine where you have to knock off, and it's time to cook dinner. It's time to get out of the cold, and it's time to sleep. On orbit, it's similar in that you get these cycles of day and night, day and night, and you could go for a long period of time thinking, I'm not ready for bed yet. And then all of a sudden you get really, really tired. And the flight docs on the ground looking out after you actually regulate your schedule so that you get off-duty time, and then you have sleep time reserved for you. And only in rare occasions can the mission control violate the sleep time and your off-duty time.
I got
Yes.
How do you get those stakes down around the tents?
Oh, we have a great big hammer. And depending on the ice, sometimes you can pound the stakes in, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have to drill a hole. And if you get to a place where you're setting up camp and it's really, really tough ice, you have to drill a hole every place. I think there's 18 tent stakes to set up a Scott tent, and it can take a few minutes to drill a hole. And what we typically do in that circumstance is everybody works together in groups. There are 8 of us, so about 4 people would work. You can rapidly get one tent set up, and the other 4 people would get another tent set up. And then you have shelter, and then you can take turns warming up, and then you work and you set everybody else's tent up. There'd be 2 people per tent, and 2 people working by themselves in 40-kilometer-per-hour wind trying to set up a tent like that. It's really, really tough, especially if you have to drill each hole in the ice. And working in teams like this allows you to get stuff done much quicker than working by yourself.
How many tents did you have to set up there?
We would. There was 8 of us in our group. And then there was another group a couple hundred miles away, a group of 4. So there was 12 total out. And in our group of 8, we would each have a tent for 2 people. So there's 4 tents. And then we had a repair tent, like you could have tools and stuff, so you could do repairs. And then we had the poo tent. And the poo tent was typically the first one set up. I mean, it's just like when the shuttle gets on orbit, one of the first things that happens on the middeck is to get the toilet set up. That's an important piece of equipment no matter where you are. Yes.
Don, I think you said that the meteorites are 40,000 years old?
Yeah, 40,000 Earth years, about. Yeah.
I guess I have 2 questions. You probably do a lot of data on the meteorites themselves. Do you collect a lot of data or determine a lot of data and record it as far as where you find them exactly?
Yes. Yeah, we have GPS. We have GPS receivers and maps, and every meteorite gets logged from a GPS point of view. And AMS may have these master maps that shows where every single meteorite has been collected, and you can start to see patterns again. You know, if you're standing where the meteorites are, you can't see a pattern, but you plot them on a map and look at it on a length scale of multiple kilometers, all of a sudden you can see how the meteorites are being pushed around by the glaciers. And once you figure that out, then you can specifically go to areas on the ice in Antarctica where you can figure out that you have a higher probability of having the meteorites concentrated.
And the other question is, how do you determine how long they've been sitting there in Antarctica?
Yeah, that's a tough one to do. It's easy to date through isotopic analysis, date the meteorites themselves. What you have to do is kind of date the ice and the areas where they've been sitting, and it's not as precise of a number. And 40,000 years seem to be sort of a canonical number that people use. If they're around too much longer than that, the ice moves and they're in the ocean. You know, if you move 10 meters a year and you integrate that over 40,000 years, you've traveled a long way. So once the meteorites get get down towards the ocean, they're gone. So you can't, typically you don't find meteorites that have been on Earth for millions of years just because the ice isn't that old that they've been in.
Did you run into penguins?
Penguins, I think my kids were disappointed because I didn't see a penguin in Antarctica. The penguins and all the life that you think of being in Antarctica is only along the shore region. You get more than 100 kilometers inland, and you'll see lichens and little microbiological critters growing, but you won't see big life forms. The only life forms we saw were ourselves. However, there's a seagull-looking bird. It's called a skua. And it's like a seagull on steroids, and he's really, really scrappy. And if you're walking around McMurdo, they've learned that these blue foam plates contain food, and they'll actually dive down and grab your plate and fly off with it. And they're kind of like if bears in Yellowstone Park could fly. That's what and they're shorebirds. But we were 200 miles from the South Pole, 800 miles from the coast, and on occasion we'd see a skua fly by. And there was absolutely no food. There was nothing for him or her to eat. And we have no idea what these skuas were doing, flying inland. Maybe they're off on their own form of exploration. But every once in a while we did see a skua. No penguins. There are penguins around the McMurdo area, but unless you're a biologist studying penguins, they like to keep tourists away from harassing the penguins.
Well, thank you, Don.